Good morning, everyone. This is Jim Wunderman. We just have folks coming into our webinar today called Bay Area Impact, Accelerating New California Water Storage Projects. So let's give ourselves just a few seconds for the crowd to form, and we'll be back and we'll start. Okay, let's get it going. So over the course of the last number of years, I've spoken out and written many pieces about the state of our water system, dire consequences if we don't improve it. Most of the conversation I've led is around the issue of drought. It's not raining, it's not snowing. The snowpack is melting quicker. We don't have enough water. We're not going to have enough water, so we need to make more water. And how do we do that? We need to begin recycling in earnest. We need to get serious about desalination projects. We need to build the right pipes and infrastructure to support it. And of course, we need to enhance our water storage capacity for the times when precipitation actually occurs. So that conversation has really turned to the latter lately when we had these record storms come through, atmospheric rivers, all sorts of new names for weather conditions that we don't hear about and memorize and then forget over the next bunch of years when it stops raining for a while. So penned a letter that was printed in the Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, the Sacramento Bee, saying, come on now, it's been a long time and we supported water storage, the voters voted for it. Where are the projects? What's the status? What can we do here? So we decided it would be a good idea to ask a panel of experts, and that's just what we have for you today to talk about this. So I'm really excited about this discussion. So let me introduce you to our moderators, and I'll let them take it from there. I'll start with Bill Sloan. He's a partner at Venable LLP, whose practice specializes in regulatory and litigation involving land development, water resources, air quality, climate, energy, and endangered species. Welcome, Bill. And Adrian Covert, he's the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Bay Area Council, and he oversees the council's various climate initiatives and is an expert on water policy. So with that, let me turn it over to our moderators, and everyone enjoy, and let's all walk away from this with new information and new zest for make something happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the panelists who are joining us and fellow moderator Bill. Talk about from drought to deluge, right? I live in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County. There was a 2-week window just a few weeks ago where we had 15 inches of rain. Never seen anything like that. Records just shattered. Bill, are you in San Francisco?
I'm actually in Marin County, and fun fact about me, I lived in India for a year and lived through a season of the monsoons, and I have to say this rain event that we just lived through, it certainly took me back to those times. One of the interesting things about Marin County, the Marin Municipal Water District, they do a pretty good job of showing up-to-date data on the storage capacity and how much water we have stored for the water district. And it was interesting to watch it as we passed through that event and watch how the levels rose. And I noticed, at a certain point, the capacity reached its maximum, and it leads you to start thinking, okay, well, so what's happening now? Like, where's all that water going, and what are we doing about it? Particularly when it was just, a month or two ago, we were all, laser focused on the drought, and then suddenly we're facing all this rain. So I'm super excited to hear from our panelists today. I think they're very well equipped to help make some sense of all these issues. And I know, Adrian, you mentioned, I think that you had some statistic. Was that the 15 inches in Santa Rosa?
Well, that was 15 inches in Santa Rosa, but I also got a snowpack statistic that I'm going to bring up here in a second. I want to get Ellen to remark on what we're looking at. So we'll get to that in a minute. That's a good segue to do introductions. So
Yeah.
Ellen, why don't you go ahead and start by introducing yourself very briefly to the listeners and viewers today.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you today. I'm Ellen Hanak. I am the director of the Water Policy Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. We are based in the Bay Area and in Sacramento, and we do, we try to bring good information to the policy debates and discussions.
Great, and I'll jump in. I know we also have Jerry Brown here today. Jerry, would you mind introducing yourself for the group?
Yeah, for everybody's benefit, I'm the other Jerry Brown. I'm the one with hair. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. My name is Jerry Brown. I'm the executive director of the Sites Project Authority. We are the lead on the development of the Sites Reservoir project, which we're going to talk about today, among other things. And prior to this engagement, I've been with the authority for about 3 years, and prior to that, I was the general manager at Contra Costa Water District for about 10 years, and have been involved in public utilities across California for the last 36 years. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for being here, Jerry and Ellen. And with your history, not only with sites, but with Contra Costa Water District, you've been involved now really with 2 Proposition 1 projects, with the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion project as well here in the Bay Area. So, let's get into questions. First, I want to start with the chart that I referred to earlier. Ellen, can you help us understand this past month's worth of storms? Put this in perspective for us. So this image that I grabbed from the Department of Water Resources, explain to the viewers and the listeners what this graph says, how much water has fallen over California, and how does that compare with historical averages?
Great. Okay, so these are great kinds of charts to help look at sort of where we are relative to the typical, the distribution across years, and also to show kind of how we get our precip, which is typically in big amounts, and then we go for a while with nothing, and then big amounts again. So California has a very volatile season, sort of rainfall precipitation from one year to the next, but also within our rainy seasons. And so this year has gotten off to a great start. It's been a very wet start to the season. We had 9 atmospheric rivers put us in the national and international news for a number of days in a row. Some downsides of that have been some really horrible flooding and loss of life. And so that's been a lot of the focus of the news, but another part of the focus has been the fact that this is potentially a way to help get us, past a really dry spell that we've had over the last few years. So statewide average, which I think is what your chart is showing, Adrian, the folks at Scripps say that we are at about 75% of the April 1st total that we get, and so if it doesn't rain anymore, it's not going to be great. But it turns out also that this has been a cold bunch of storms, so we've got a lot of snow in the Sierra, and well above our 100% April 1st average. So we got to kind of cross our fingers that it stays cool enough that snow melts as it should, and also that looks like maybe there's some more weather coming in a couple weeks.
Right. So that red line there that we're looking at, it could go, if we flatline like we did last winter. Like if folks remember last winter, we had record wet August, kind of wet November, and a record wet December, and then a record dry January, February, and March. Just nothing happened for the rest of the season. And so what started as a really wet winter ended up being a drought year. So we're in a position now, judged on that red line, like you said, we could end up at 75% of snowpack, which is bad but not terrible. But we could end up, in a below average year this year, right?
That's still possible. Right. So, we're in a better place than we were this time last year. I can say that, and it's looking like there's a good chance that our reservoirs are a lot of them are going to fill, which they did not do last year.
Yeah, so if I can jump in there, Ellen, thank you. I think probably on the minds of many people after living through all that rain, you say, well, are we actually still in a drought? And I'm predicting what will be the answer from you on that. But can you explain what impact you think these storms will have on the drought? And maybe more importantly, so that folks can understand what has to happen for us to be able to actually at someday declare an end to the drought? Like what benchmarks are we looking at when we make those decisions?
Right. So there are different kinds of drought and sort of there's a certain amount of, it's in the eye of the beholder a little bit as to whether folks are feeling that they're in drought or not. One of them is what's going on with our surface storage, which is one way that we save water for not only for the summer, the growing season, but also, for subsequent years. This is going to be a great year for surface storage. It looks good, just given what we've gotten so far and this snowpack that I mentioned. As long as we don't have a repeat of the driest 3 months of on record like we did last year. Groundwater is a different story. Groundwater is kind of our drought reserve, and in many places we're leaning on it very heavily, even in not dry years. So if you kind of look at, it's more of a cumulative thing, and there's a lot of effort now to get to sustainable levels of pumping, but we're not going to make up the hole in the ground just with this year precip. And then if you think about ecosystems, the science sort of points to you need more than just some good. These storms have been really helpful, but you need more than just one good wet season to really give species and ecosystems a chance to recover. So the fish are still feeling drought.
And Ellen, can you go into that for just a little bit? Why is it that 1 year one wet year isn't that helpful for species? Is it about generations and how spawning works? Or?
For example, yeah, if you think about salmon, typically 3-4 year life cycle. So that's a lucky strategy for them. It does allow them to kind of have a bad year, have 2 bad years. But if you're just getting one good shot in the arm of good cold water and abundant flows, that's not gonna help the populations as much as we kind of need them to. And just on the issue of declaring a drought emergency, I think that is not something where there are boxes to check off. It's really much more about where do we need emergency help. And I think the Newsom administration has been really careful and strategic, I would say, about not screaming emergency too soon and doing it kind of in a surgical way at the beginning of this drought, where they initially declared it in certain counties where there were real problems at the back in 2021, and then kind of added regions as the problems grew. And a lot of that was focused on where do you need emergency authorization to do stuff that you need special kind of authorities to do. So that kind of gets to the issue of when we don't need that anymore. It's kind of maybe like with the COVID regs, then you can get rid of that.
Good question. And I want to remind everyone that to please drop your questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to guest questions towards the end of the podcast. So as they come up, go ahead and drop them in there and we'll get to them. Ellen, one big question on a lot of people's minds is gets to the point that Jim raised at the start of this podcast or this webinar. Are we storing enough of this water? Now, during the summer, Governor Newsom announced state goals to increase storage capacity by 4 million acre feet of water by 2040. Do you know where that number comes from, the 4 million acre feet? Help provide us some context on the state's goals when it comes to water storage.
So I'm not exactly sure where the 4 million comes from. There is the state, and Jerry's going to be able to talk much better about this than I. The state does have money that has been set aside for storage expansion, and that includes the sites project that Jerry is leading. The total on the of the projects that were eligible was about, you know, a little bit less than 3 million acre feet, but I think that included Temperance Flat, Jerry, if I'm not wrong. So which was one of the big ones. So there's still some difference there to fill, and those Prop 1 projects are a combination of, you know, sites is the biggest one. There are a couple other surface reservoirs, including Los Vaqueros expansion. And there's some groundwater projects. There are, in addition to that, groundwater storage projects all over the state that folks are working on, and that could well add up to the difference. There may be a couple other smaller reservoirs that folks are considering as well, but there's definitely potential to capture more water, and that's been a big part of the news in the last few weeks, is like, why is all this water flowing out of under the Golden Gate Bridge? I'll just say that we can do a better job of kind of skimming off some of that water, and sites is one of the projects that's intended to be able to do that, along with a number of others. But because of this very spiky kind of weather and the way we get these big storms, we should never imagine that we would be capturing all of the high flows that are going out. And just to give you an idea, I think sites maybe has a capacity per day of taking about 3,000 CFS, or 6,000 acre feet a day, something like that. Last week we had 175,000 CFS going out the Delta. So, you know, it would help, but it's not. We're still, even if we build a lot and we do a lot, we're not gonna stop seeing big flows coming out from big storms.
Well, I think, Jerry, you've been probably chomping at the bit to start telling us about your project. You know, Sites Reservoir is certainly one of the most closely watched, and really the only game in town right now in terms of large new surface water projects being proposed. So for the benefit of folks on the program today, let's just start right at the beginning. Can you describe for us exactly what the Sites project is?
Sure. The Sites project is really a unique kind of storage system. It's not like the Shasta Dam or the Oroville Dam or the Folsom Dam that you see driving the highways of California. It's a 21st century storage system that is keyed off of being off stream, and I think I can't overemphasize that to people, because I think that makes such a huge difference in our compatibility to the environment, and also in how we intend to operate and what the Sites project is intended to do for us. Essentially, what the Sites project is a 1.5 million acre foot storage impoundment that's in an area about 10 miles west of the I-5 at the little town of Maxwell. It's about an hour north of Sacramento. And what we would do is we would bring water in off of the Sacramento River at times like these, when there are large amounts of flows in the river to be captured and stored. We would bring that over into the Sites Reservoir via existing canal systems that are already in the area. The capacity is actually 4,000 CFS between the two canals, Ellen. That's about 8,000 acre feet a day is what we would be able to move into storage. We would park that into the storage impoundment and then hold that for times when we need it most, like years like last year or the year before that, where we have very dry conditions. And the water would be used not just for the local area, mostly irrigation for agriculture, but also it would be put back into the river that would then serve to support and improve the conditions for the species. And it would be moved through the Delta to participants in the project that are south of Delta through the export pumps in those drier years. So just as an example, on average, there's about 250,000 acre feet of new water supply that would be created by the Sites Reservoir project. That's average, is based on 82 years of hydrology and a whole bunch of confusing stuff, but that's an annual average. In a dry year like last year, that number would have pumped up to about 450,000 acre feet. So last year, we would have been able to have another roughly 500,000 acre feet of new water that would have been available for our families, farms, fish, and fowl. That could have really made a big difference. So it's really a question. Any big project that you do like this is really about trade-offs, okay? And it's really a question for us, is the water that we're seeing pass out through the river and into the ocean today, is that more important to all of us and the environment than saving a little piece of that and putting it into storage and then making it available for our river systems and our people in the drier years? That's really the question. And I think the clear answer is the trade-off is worthy, especially when you consider the fact that we're seeing the changing climate and the reduction in snowpack, which by far is our largest reservoir above ground in California, that we seriously rely on for our water supply for our communities today.
Adrian, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. 2 years into COVID, I'll figure it out eventually. So Jerry, I'm wondering if you can walk us through, this project's been around, this project has been, I think, in the conceptual phase, at least for 3 decades, maybe even more. It's getting 6 decades, excuse me. Walk us through where it's at right now, particularly the financing of it, because these big storage projects, one criticism that they get is that they're really expensive, and it's really tough to get ratepayers to be able to completely foot the bill, especially given the rates of increasing price of water over the past decade. Help us explain how the math works on a project like this.
The Sites project total cost estimate right now is in 2021 dollars is $4 billion. Let's say $4 billion. That is a lot of money. As it's currently configured in terms of the participation, about 65% of that would be borne by local water districts and agencies. About 20% of that would be borne by the state through Prop 1 for public benefits. And then the remainder would be the federal component, federal cost share, which is also being considered for public benefits and improvement for water users in the Central Valley project. So that's really the 3 places that are paying for the project. This is a beneficiary pays project. That's a little bit unique in that if you're going to get a benefit from the project, you're going to pay for that benefit. So many of our water projects across the state in the past, large projects like this, have been state or federal run, owned, and funded projects that really don't apply necessarily the beneficiary pays approach completely. I think the state project definitely, the users of that project are paying for it, but generally speaking, in this particular case, those that are paying are the ones that are benefiting from the project. So yes, it is a relatively expensive project. Right now, we estimate it's around $750 to $800 an acre foot. That, given where we are in some areas, is not all that expensive and is actually one of the lower cost options that are available. Probably could still find some conservation that would be less than that, but generally speaking, just to give the audience some frame of reference, recycled water projects are generally in the $2,000 to $3,000 an acre foot cost range, and desalination projects can be anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 and above per acre foot. That's an expense. Yeah, that adds an expense to the bottom line of a water agency, and how you allocate those costs to your ratepayers is a key question. And certainly for agriculture, that's a whole nother set of circumstances.
And so that was 750 an acre foot you mentioned. Is that right?
Approximately, yeah.
You know, the state water, so we looked into this about a year ago, and state water project water averages about 1,200 an acre foot. Hetch Hetchy SFP seawater is about 1,000. So that, you know, you're batting above average with a price like that.
Full disclosure, that's FOB out of the reservoir. So you still got to get it down through the delta, into the canals, all the losses that you get, and the carriage water requirements, on and on. By the time you get it down to the LA basin, it's probably $1,100 to $1,200.
Still competitive with state water project water. So thanks for the clarification.
So we've been talking about Proposition 1 a little bit, and maybe if we expand that discussion a tiny bit, because that obviously was an effort to start bringing money and solutions to the problem. And I'm wondering, either Ellen or Jerry, could you remind folks exactly what Proposition was and what it was designed to do?
Jerry, are you okay with me starting and you correcting the record?
Oh, I won't correct you. I know you know what you're talking about.
So Prop 1 was put on the ballot by the legislature for the November 2014 election, and the voters approved it. It actually had a history going back to the late 2000s, when the legislature passed a whole package in 2009 of water reform legislation. There were 5 bills, and one piece was this proposition, which was like $7.5 billion. So it included a lot funding for a lot of different things, including what was unique at the time really was $2.7 billion for the state to do some cost matching for storage projects. And the state, you know, as Jerry mentioned, has definitely put money into storage in the past, but that was through the state water project, where basically most of that money is paid back by water users through contracts. So the state kind of is the banker there, but is not the payer. Whereas in this case, this was state going to put taxpayer dollars into storage, and the state had kind of done that in a sort of little way by supporting groundwater recharge projects through past bonds, but had not been able to touch surface storage. And it was kind of like one of the third rail issues, just too contentious, because folks on the kind of more environmental side of the view of water issues felt that surface storage had been just so damaging to the ecology of California that they didn't want to put money into that. And so this was a big compromise, and it was a bipartisan thing, got put on the ballot. The compromise itself, I think, is why it's taken so long to get the money out the door, because the compromise said it will be beneficiary pays, and so this is only going to be for public benefits, and the Bond Act listed what that could include. It can include some things like flood control, could include some things like emergency supplies, but it had to include at least half of the state money had to go for environmental ecosystem benefits. So any of these projects to be eligible has to have a sizable ecosystem benefit. And it wrote in a whole bunch of language about how that had to be done. This job was given to the California Water Commission, which had to put in place a process for doing that. Very transparent, the whole thing. It turns out it's complicated to put dollar value on ecosystem benefits, and there are some different ways to do it. The project proponents were given options for how they could do that, but then it had to be reviewed and kind of pass muster. And the timeline for kind of meeting those various hurdles up until, you know, January 22, basically people were meeting the timeline that was envisioned in the law. Now the projects, including Jerry's and 6 others, are in the process of getting their final approvals ready, getting their financing ready. And Jerry, there's probably ways to speed that up, I'm guessing, but you know, when people sort of look at it and say, why didn't we get money out the door right away? That was not what voters approved. That was not what the legislature agreed to. So it's a little bit of buyer's remorse now that we're, or you know, misunderstanding of not reading the fine print that we're seeing now in the frustration.
Jerry, how much of that do you want to correct?
None. That is totally and 100% accurate in my opinion. And I would just want to say that the Prop 1 competitive process was a little bit clunky because it was the first time that we'd ever tried to do something like that. But we got through it, and we're stronger because of it, I think. We have a strong participant and a strong investor in the state in these projects. That's a little bit strange, though, I would say, for somebody like California Department of Fish and Wildlife to be an investor in the project. Under the Prop 1, they've been tasked with securing the public benefits for the environment. And we are in the process right now, all of the projects, of talking to the agencies about how to manifest this commitment in contract form. And so we're working through all those things. It's really, we're creating a new way of delivering water across the state that is new, innovative, and I think it's going to put us in a great spot for the future. For example, one of the things in sites is that the investment under Prop 1 basically dedicates a share of the reservoir to environmental purposes. There'll be a share of the storage space and a share of the water that gets dedicated for environmental purposes. And we're really looking to CDFW and possibly environmental groups to assist them in advising and directing where that water goes. We're hoping that that water can be put to best use in the places most needed in each and every year. And just like any of the other participants that control their space and water, the state will have this asset now to help address issues that they see across the environment. So it's a really exciting, great opportunity. I just say it's a little clunky because it's new and different. And anytime we try to do something new and different in water, it takes a little bit of work. But because of the people that are working so hard to make it work, we'll get there. I'm confident of that. We'll be delivering these projects within this decade.
So, well, that's really interesting. So my next question was going to be, how much of the delay on Prop 1 projects is attributable to general state bureaucratic inertia versus the language in the bond measure itself? And from what you both are saying, it's really just the projects aren't really facing a delay. They are unfolding more or less on the schedule that the voters approved when they passed the measure in 2014. And the language in that approval was a bipartisan agreement that sent the bond to the voters in the first place. But you're also saying that the process could be quicker, and was really kind of burdened by the fact that this was a new way of doing things, a new way of funding, where the state comes in and says, we're going to fund only the public benefit portion. We need to figure out the monetary value of the public benefit of this project. And that takes a long time. Now, I don't know if the public understands that. I think that's a bit, deep for the public to understand. I think what they see is it's 10 years, where's the project? And folks in the water world, like, all of us, have reasons, but, what opportunities, I think this gets to, I'll turn it over to Bill, but I'm just thinking, what can we do next go around to speed these projects up.
Yeah, I just to piggyback on that, I know the governor right now is talking about potential new bond measures for water and climate and the like. I guess I think Adrian kind of succinctly said it. What opportunities are, or maybe if you were to put on your hat, knowing what you know now about Prop 1, how do you explain to people what are ways that we could do it better, and factor into that, does it make sense to do it quicker? I know on the finance side of things, moving at a decades-long pace is not ideal, but certainly from the environmental context, it's not, unfortunately, unfamiliar. So what would you, if you could invent a new Proposition 1 today, what would it look like? And why don't I start with Ellen, just to, I bet you have interesting things on that.
So, you know, we looked at this recently in a study where we were kind of focusing on the environmental water piece of this and thinking, you know, partly looking at are voters going to get the environmental benefits that they think they voted for also as part of this, and is there a better way to do this? And you know, one of the conclusions of the team was it is really important for us to have storage capacity for environmental water. So, you know, what Jerry mentioned as sites is looking at, you know, to do this. And that's really important because in order to be efficient with the water that we store for the environment, you know, for providing cold water, for providing pulse flows, for all the sort of things we need in our highly managed system, you need to be able to park the water for the fish and the birds sometimes, and then be able to release it at the right times. And that's actually good for everybody because that means that you have more flexibility for what you do on the ag and the urban side as well. The way Prop 1 was conceived didn't always sort of think about it in terms of having that parking space for environmental water. It was much more, how is each individual project going to provide some specific benefits? And so the sum of all these projects doesn't kind of look like a coherent way to help the ecosystems in this watershed. Sites is probably, you know, one of the ones that has the best shot at having flexibility to do more. I would say the Los Vaqueros, it has some good focused work that it's going to do with wetlands. But, you know, if you were thinking about it in terms of how are we going to make the most of environmental water with state money, this is not the way you would have gone about it. So, and it would be less frustrating maybe for folks too, if you said, okay, we're going to put some state money into environmental water storage. Maybe, you know, kind of ask people to come forward specifically saying, what can you do for least cost? You know, more like a reverse auction kind of thing, which is what they do now for getting water for birds up in the Sac Valley, for example. In dry times, you know, they'll ask growers, you know, they need 6 inches here certain times, ask people what they can provide it for and try to kind of get the least cost. And growers do it based on their own bottom lines. So an approach like that might make sense. Looking at it at a watershed perspective to sort of say, okay, strategically, how can these projects work together, would really help. And, you know, maybe thinking about just, you know, as an idea, a project like sites, instead of like just the state coming in with the 20% or whatever it's going to end up being, just come in, state and fed say, we're going to put public benefit money into just paying for this reservoir. It's going to be fundamentally an environmental water storage device. The environmental water manager could still work well with others, ag and urban, to provide benefits and even lease capacity, lease water, things like that. But, you know, not worry about all of the complex issues that come with trying to piece so many different pieces of money together. So that would be sort of our pitch for thinking about future public money, because I don't think it's realistic to expect a lot of taxpayer dollars to go into water storage that is mainly going to be benefiting water users. realistically.
All right, and Jerry, I'll give you the magic wand now.
No, thank you. I don't want the magic wand. I'll stick to just trying to get sites built.
Okay.
But I think Ellen's remarks are very, very good, and she's covered a lot of what I would think. I wanted to comment that I think that in terms of expediency with these projects, the governor's August 2022 water supply strategy last year was a big announcement in the water world, and you know, a lot of people are saying, well, what's coming out of that? Well, I'm here to tell you there is some really good things coming out of that. He's assembled a strike team within the state agencies that is coordinating both the federal and state elements to achieve the expeditious delivery that he has called for. And you know, these agencies, they have to be very diligent about going about their decisions. We're reaching that kind of point where there's not a whole lot of play left, and so they've got to be very careful and cautious on the one hand, but we have an urgent situation on the other. And so I think what this strike team is helping all of us to think about is, well, let's be careful and cautious, but let's also act with urgency. And let's get the question called to the table and make a decision and move forward. Adrian talked about, you know, 6 decades sites in development. Well, part of that is the question never gets called because we just kind of, you know, roam around the edges and don't really get to the hard question. And we're finally there. You know, we are revving on all cylinders right now. We're finally there. Second point I wanted to make is sites has a waiting list of 13 public agencies. If we had the ability right now, which we don't, we could add another 25% participation to the project by just folks that are out there, water agencies saying, I need water supply. I got problems. I need to find a way to solve these problems. Sites can do that for me. We're saying, well, we would love to help you. We're fully subscribed. But if anybody can't go forward, we'll drop you in. Or maybe the other thing that we're thinking about is maybe we can find a way to work with you so that if a participant in sites doesn't need their water in a particular year, then you could be in the marketplace to fill the need and to utilize that water. And we could become more efficient and optimized in our performance of the project. So I wanted to mention that when we talked about a new proposition, because the demand is really there. And it's not even a demand for free projects or free water. It's a demand for, I got problems, I need help, I got money, let's get something done.
Mm-hmm. But well said, well said. So I think we've learned a lot today about what has held up the Prop 1 storage projects. Glad to see that, you know, we've seems like we've come to hopefully near the end of a long public process that was laid out in Prop 1. But we've also learned some lessons to hopefully when we design this drought or this water resilience bond that the governor is interested in debating, we can learn some lessons. Now, I want to ask you one more question before we go to some of the audience questions, which we've got a bunch here. So really engaged audience. So this is both to Jerry and Ellen. Our discussion today has been really focused on new storage, but that's obviously not the only drought resilience measure out there. And I know it's cliche to say there's no silver bullet, you know, it's all the above strategy. Jim mentioned this, started off this discussion about mentioning desalination and recycling. Yes, buddy, hold on one sec. Daddy's doing a webinar. Boy's at home today with COVID. He's doing great, but he's home today. What gets us the biggest bang for the buck without having to pick a favorite? Maybe I am asking you to pick your favorite child. Storage, desal, recycling. We all know that they're all part of the solution, but what gets you most excited about drought resilience in California?
You want me to go first?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the answer is it depends on where you live. Because water is heavy and it's not easy to move it to somewhere where it's not already, where you don't already have conveyance to get it there. And so, in some of the coastal, central coast communities, maybe even Marin, something like desal is going to be a nice addition to what to people's drought portfolio, because they just don't have good interconnections to the rest of the state. Down in SoCal, there's tremendous potential for recycled water to be put into groundwater basins. There's some experimentation happening now with getting it into surface reservoirs. In the Bay Area, at least in the sort of right around the Bay, that's not a great option until we move to sort of new standards for what they call direct potable reuse, where you can directly get very carefully get recycled water directly into the water supply, because our topography and our terrain just doesn't make that pencil out. So in some places groundwater recharge. So it's kind of all of the above, but with different accents and focus in different places, which is why statewide bonds tend to have all those things in them.
I personally like conservation, because that's just how California has always been and always will be. It's a state that looks to conserve and make best use of its resources. But unfortunately, we can't rely on that to save us anymore, largely because in planning for new development, conservation has extended our supplies and allowed us to bring in more houses and more people. And so as that becomes more evident, it's not going to be something we can solely rely on. So that is something that is critical and top priority, in my opinion, but not going to save us. We got to figure out how to change the rate structures within water agencies. Prop 218 is creating affordability issues for our low income and disadvantaged communities that we have to address, because what happens is more and more of the cost burden falls on those communities, and I don't think that's what we want as a state. And finally, I think our best source long term is, as he said, direct potable reuse is going to be a game changer across our state. In the urban areas, we're not really talking about ag here so much, but in the urban areas, that's going to be a game changer. That's going to be a new source of supply that is going to be is right now completely untapped and has huge potential. It's not going to save the ag areas. I think, here's my opinion. My Sac Valley and Central Valley investors might not like this, but to some extent, land use control is going to be probably a greater degree of answer to our ag shortage question. And market forces. If we all love everything that we grow in California and enjoy those at our dinner tables, but we really like how much it costs. Those things are going to start costing a lot more for us. And unless we can better utilize and get more production out of the acres that we are able to irrigate, we're not going to be able to sustain things. So there's going to have to be some control and regulation of where we grow and what we grow, and there's going to have to be some extension and efficiency gains within the areas that we are growing.
Well, I think that, thank you, Jerry and Ellen. Those are great great answers. Now, Bill, can you see the questions that are being answered, that are being asked on the thread?
Yeah, I can.
Then why don't you and I just kind of go through these in order? So you go ahead and read the first one.
Okay. I was wondering, we have so many. I was going to try to group a couple of them together. There's some specific to Jerry. So we've had a few questions here about the sites project, and what I thought I would try to do is ask you One question we had is what's the costliest part of the project? But also what has occurred that has helped speed the acceptance and the support for the project? And finally, when do you expect it to go to construction? So those kind of fit well together. And there was one other one asking about, is there a specific shortfall in water supply that sites is meant to fill? So why don't I stop there? I know you probably have to pen down all those and I can read them again, but it seemed like those fit together.
Gotcha. Sure. Great questions. Costliest part of the project, yes, are the dams. Fairly small though in context to many other dams. 2 main dams, 9 saddle dams and dikes. The total package of the $4 billion for the dam locations and the road relocations. That's another part of dam construction. Is you got to move some road. Is about 40% of the total project cost. So that's the answer to that question. What has been done so far to speed the acceptance and support for the project? I would say the authorities' diligence to listen and to hear the feedback from the various interests that have come forward providing feedback to the project. There's been a huge amount of change to the project since its previous rendition in 2017. We did an EIR in 2017. We did a revised EIR in 2021. Lots of changes, and I think that with listening comes understanding, and I think we as a project have been listening and understanding what the concerns and issues are, but also the communities that were concerned with the project have listened to what the project's needs are and how it would work and what it would do and what it needs to be cost effective, and have accepted some of that. So I think that is probably my answer to that one. And then the last one was how much time is it going to take us to get this thing built? We're on a fast track as quick as we can to get a water right, critical permits, and advance the engineering by the end of next year, so that we can go back to our 22 local agency investors and ask them to make a go, no go decision on entering construction, which would start in 2025. And then we estimate we'd be completed with construction by the end of 2031 and in operation by the beginning of 2032. So that winter, we'd start collecting water into the reservoir, unless the regulators let us start filling as we build.
Great. So we've got a couple more questions. I'm going to try to get as quick and concise answers from y'all as we can. A couple questions related to groundwater. What's the cost of enhancing groundwater storage? That's from Hans. And then we got another question from George. What do we have to do to store all of our street runoff to recharge our groundwater systems? So that's kind of like an urban runoff groundwater question, and maybe a more open field groundwater recharge question. Are we doing enough on that? And I know there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and probably, if you look around the state, the energy around groundwater recharge is, almost everywhere now. Lot of potential in a lot of places to get more water in the ground. The cost of that, part of it is that it's often cheaper. The cost a lot of the cost, it depends on what water you're putting in the ground. And so, wet times like this are great because there's extra water that's pretty cheap. If you have access to it and can get it into the ground. But people are also using groundwater basins to put recycled water in, which is not cheap water, but it's a good place to park it. If you've got, so Orange County, for example, has been doing that for a while, and that's a great place to do it. So you can look at cost estimates from $30 an acre foot to over $1,000, depending on your water source. Some of the key to expanding capacity right now is institutional and just kind of getting agreements and good accounting systems in place in areas that want to get into groundwater storage that haven't been doing it before, so people know whose water it is when it's time to take it out again. But some of it is also getting some infrastructure in place, including improving conveyance, and that can be pricey. The urban stormwater, just sometimes that's a groundwater capture issue. Down in LA, they're doing a lot of that as part of a big public Measure W. Urban stormwater is dirty often, at least the first flushes. So you have to, that's a water quality management task, as well as sort of thinking about how do you capture it for supply. It kind of depends on if you have a place to park it or not.
Bill, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I did the wrong way. All right, so one tiny little subject that a few people have asked about, delta tunnels. I think rather than try to go deep down that path, could you just give us a sense of how you think delta tunnels would fit into the picture of what we've been discussing today? I know it's something that could cover a whole webinar in itself, but we have had a few questions about it.
You
want to take a stab at that, Jerry? I'm happy to as well, but
I wanted to make a comment to make sure people understand about sites compatibility with the delta tunnel. So everything that we've analyzed and evaluated for the Sites Reservoir project is based on through delta conveyance. There is no reliance or dependency or integration with the tunnel project. So I want to be very clear. That's a fallacy that's out there that needs to get corrected, and so I appreciate the opportunity to make that comment. Now, does that mean that we're in conflict with the tunnel in terms of our operations? No, it just means that to have a Sites Reservoir, you don't need a tunnel, and likewise to have a tunnel, you don't need a Sites Reservoir. Tunnel and Sites Reservoir are in essence working to try to capture some of this winter water as it's currently configured, and I think there's still more work to be done on the tunnel project in that regard. But the main thing for me was just to make sure that everybody's clear about the independence of the two. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, and just, the tunnel in its current incarnation is really a reliability project. It's not about big expansion of exports through the Delta. It's much more about having flexibility. And so, for example, there's been a lot of brouhaha about pumping being restricted in the South Delta during these latest storms. That had to do with environmental regulations about how water moves on the San Joaquin side of the Delta, even though a lot of water was coming through the Sac River. The tunnel would allow you in situations like that to take water without causing problems for fish down in the Delta. For example, you still need places to park it. Oh, hi. You still need places to park it once you get it through the Delta. And so that's part of this challenge of kind of expanding capacity to recharge. They're looking at raising San Luis to be able to park more water there. So it's a conveyance is a piece of the puzzle, but storage is another piece. And we have to think about them as a overall how to improve our climate resiliency.
Great. Well, I think that is a good place to leave it. We're at 11:59. So I want to thank Bill and I want to thank Jerry and Ellen for joining us today and helping us get a little smarter about where storage is and how we can make it better and what the things to watch for as this next bond negotiations get started about where to invest next. So I want to thank you, everybody. And for folks listening, we're going to post this webinar online on our YouTube channel. So if you want to share it to some colleagues, you'll have an opportunity to do that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.